want me to ask my questions first?
Well, okay, I'll go ahead first, because I got a bunch of propaganda for everybody.
Propaganda.
Tell you what,
Yeah, can't help it somehow. Why don't we just
you
talk
know
first?
what, it'd be too much problem for me. You need it. You can help me. I said I didn't need any help, but I do.
You'll let her?
Susie, how organized?
Yeah, I want everybody to get a copy of that and everybody to get a copy of this.
These two different things?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, what are these papers you have?
You want to take one and pass it
I'm
back?
sorry.
I'll just, yeah.
Oh,
Take one of these and pass it back.
Is the same thing going up there?
No, y'all are going to switch and then they'll switch.
And I failed to mention, if it's all right with Mr. Meredith, I think he's agreed to, if somebody wants to get a book signed following this, we're okay with that.
now, usually I'm not long-winded, but today is the most important thing. And I guess the first thing for me to say is why I called the owner of Square Books and asked him if we could be here today. The reason is Square Books. I've written and published 30 books. 3 or 4 of them were published by major publishers. And the most books sold have been sold by Square Books that I wrote. And the first time I had a book selling thing here, I spent the night at the owner's house, and he was then the mayor of Oxford. And it had never been mentioned since that time. But I will later say how much I've been involved with this black-white race thing. But I want to read what I wrote about Professor Kathleen Wickham's book. And I hope ain't nobody in a hurry, because I ain't never took this much time. I've been making speeches all my life. I ain't never made one that's many pages. But this is how important I think today is. I done messed up somewhere.
Yeah.
This is the last page, not the first page.
Okay, here's the first page. Okay, there it is. I
Okay.
read it in my packet.
I gave her a copy of my propaganda the day before yesterday or sometime. So she read it all I was hoping. Review of the book, James Meredith, Breaking the Barriers by Kathleen Wickham. And I have to give credit because her husband already told me he named the book. She can't take full credit for that. Good evening. I am James Meredith. I would like to thank Square Books for allowing me to give a review of the book, James Meredith, Breaking the Barriers by Kathleen Wickham. This book consists of several short stories surrounding the event that occurred on September 30th and October 1st, 1962. When I registered and attended my first class at Ole Miss. In the first story, Insurrection, I give my viewpoint of the events of those 2 days. Next, we come to a story by Dorothy Gilliam from her book, Trailblazers, a pioneering journalist's fight to make the media look more like America, titled Assignment Mississippi. Miss Gilliam lays out the difficulties that black members of the press encountered in reporting on the segregated South, which many people today have no comprehension of. William Doyle, an author that I have worked with more than once, contributed Warrior. Mr. Doyle gives an excellent account of my life leading up to my registration at Ole Miss in 1962. Mr. Doyle captures my warrior attitude that I developed during my 9 years in the United States Air Force. It was here in the United States Air Force where I formulated my strategy to force the President of the United States, the United States Justice Department, and the United States military, the most powerful military force in the world, to support my effort to attend Ole Miss. There was no other way to be successful. Curtis Wilkie's contribution, Never, is a bird's eye view of the riot that took place at Oxford, Mississippi. Mr. Wilkie captures the field of over 2,000 or 3,000 students and non-student rioters attacking the vastly outnumbered force of 127,000 United States Marshals until the arrival of troops in the early morning hours of October 1, 1962. One can almost feel their eyes burning from this tear gas. Sidna Mitchell was student editor of the Daily Mississippi, Ole Miss campus newspaper, during the 1962 fall and 1963 spring semester. Miss Mitchell discusses her review of the riot that night and the editorial she wrote afterward condemning the violence and calling for calm. Miss Mitchell Miss Mitchell endured backlash for her editorial, such as censure by the campus senate. Kathleen Wickham contribution, Paul Guihard murdered, looks into the life and death of Gilliard, a reporter for the French press. Mr. Gilliard's case is listed as unsolved by the FBI, but no doubt he was murdered Also, another person died in the riot, Ray Gunther from Abbottville, Mississippi. Mr. Gunther, who was watching the riot from a distance, was killed by a single gunshot wound. No one was able to determine the source of the gunshot. Henry T. Gallagher's contribution, Safeguarding James Meredith, from his book, James Meredith and the Ole Miss Riot, a soldier's story, took the story of the Ole Miss Riot from a soldier's view, tells the story from a soldier's view. Lieutenant Gallagher, a member of the 716th Military Police Battalion from Fort Dix, New Jersey, part of the 30,000 troops deployed to put down the insurrection and enforce the order of the federal court. Mr. Gallagher described the tension in Oxford and on the Ole Miss campus as his battalion rolled in at 5 a.m. on October 1, 1962. Lieutenant Gallagher, following orders, cleared out the square in Oxford, where a confrontation occurred with officers of the Mississippi Highway Patrol. The Army cleared the square on October 2nd. Lieutenant Gallagher assumed command of the military unit detailed to provide security while I was on campus. Marquita Smith's contribution. African Americans recall Meredith's impact is looked through the eyes of black Mississippians as they are discussing the event that occurred at Ole Miss during the time of the riot. This is an angle from which there has been little coverage, if any, and I am glad someone has reported it. Not just someone, Ms. Wickham. I'm almost finished, but I warned you. I wanted to say these things because I've never said them, and Ole Miss is celebrating 60 years of something. They call it integration. But I'm going to finish reading these last two pages. I can say from personal knowledge, the blacks on the Ole Miss campus, who all served as janitors or cooks, supported my actions. A janitor would come by and touch me on the sleeve of a cafeteria worker would smile and may touch me on the hand. On multiple weekends, I was invited to various workers' homes for Sunday lunch. This support was significant to me. William Winter, former governor of Mississippi, discusses Ed Meek's riot, witness to anger and change. His views on the riot and the effect it had on Mississippi. Governor Winter stated, and I quote, mainly because this is my favorite quote in the book, until James Meredith came along, we were all prisoners of a system that held down all of us, that dictated what we felt free to say, whom we could associate with, and how we lived our lives. We were all in bondage to an indefensible way of life that was at odds with the ideals on which this country was founded. The state, Mississippi, has now begun to come into its own as a result of this liberation. The last contribution to this book, Graduation Day, is by me from my book, 3 Years in Mississippi. And that's one of the books that Square Books has sold more copies than anybody else in America. This contribution describes the events that my feelings on graduation day, August 18, 1963, at Ole Miss. Immediately after graduation, I and my family left Oxford and went to Memphis, Tennessee, escorted by the United States Marshals. I'm going to have to slow down. My father took me aside to express his satisfaction of having lived to see this day. My father knew these people for 72 years, and he has seen the meanness, the contempt in their looks. Now he witnessed a fading of all the pervading hatred which accompanied every contact between whites and blacks in Mississippi. At least for one day, it had been missing from their faces. Considering my University of Mississippi idea, my father's conclusion about Mississippi whites surprised me. These people can be decent. However, before I finish this book review, there is one more contribution that I want to acknowledge, and in some respects, maybe the most important, that is the foreword to the book by Jesse Holland. And that impressed me, so I had to call Miss Wickham to find out when it was actually done. And she told me that she asked him to write the introduction. And this is what I'm praising, is what he wrote. Jesse Holland discusses how I have lived my life. I ain't seen him but once. That's when he mentioned it here. But so I ain't sure exactly how you knew how I lived life. He said I was a man who refuses to compromise, a man who does what he thinks is right, regardless of expectation or cost, a maverick who writes his own story, walks his own path. I suppose there is some truth to that. I am also aware that I can go to public places such as the Lyceum and hardly be noticed. I believe that is not a bad thing. Today, any other black can walk through the Lyceum and not be noticed. which we know 60 years ago it would have and did set off a riot. Now that is an improvement. This book, James Meredith, Breaking the Barrier, is a great book about the events of September 30th and October 1st, 1962. If one was going to read only one book about the insurrection at Ole Miss, this is the book. Now, I love Mississippi. That's really the truth. Mississippi is the place that made the man I have become. As I said in my book, 3 years in Mississippi, there is a joy I feel whenever I leave Mississippi and return. Joy because I have once again lived to enter the land of my fathers, the land of my birth, the only land in which I feel at home. It is because of this joy that I have chosen to follow God's plan, my mission from God, to lay out the one and true path that will turn God's people, my people, back to Him. Laying out this one and true path is what I hope to accomplish with the rest of my life. America is at a crossroads. By taking the right road, following God's plan, which is the basis of our religion, will bring us hope and success. By taking the wrong road, which is the failure to follow God's plan, will continue us on the road to despair and destruction. God's plan is clear, and this is absolutely the last page. I was wrong. But I ain't never thanked Mississippi. And I know only a certain kind of people come to book reviews and book tours. Yo, I hope ain't nobody mad at me for taking too long, including the author. I have been involved in struggles to bring the full rights of citizenship to my people. These struggles placed my life and the life of those dear to me in mortal danger. But through God's divine intervention, my life and those dear to me will have been spared. In sharing my last mission from God, I have given many speeches and plan to give many more. The plan that God has shared with me and I have accepted is to bring back to the forefront of society the most basic of God's instructions, the Ten Commandments. The reason for the Ten Commandments was to rebuild a broken people. Just as the Israelites were a broken people, we in Mississippi, I should have just read what was on there. If we in Mississippi uplift our moral character, rebuild our families, and rebuild our schools and education system, along with our justice system, then the world will follow. It is in our hands, our future, and the nature and the future of all Mississippi and America is in our hands. I believe Mississippi is the center of the universe. We are the only people positioned now to do God's will. I'm not talking against other religions. Every religion's goal is to uplift the moral character of the people. The key is the covenant agreement. That is what the Ten Commandments are all about. God has already done his end of the bargain by giving life to his people, by giving them whatever they needed. But the people still have to fulfill that end of the covenant. The Christian church of my youth was a powerful institution that taught its members moral character as its prime job. My father belonged to a group of men that numbered up to 10 individuals who met regularly to read the Bible and hold each other accountable to lead a life of good moral character. I have found the James Meredith Bible Society that I founded, the James Meredith Bible Society, to promote that concept. However, no organization is better suited to lift the people moral character than the Christian church. The Christian church must move from acting as an observer of our decline in moral character to an organization that strives to uplift the moral characters of the people and to hold the people accountable. If not, what hope is there? And I'm going to change a little bit. I'm going to read this.
I'm going to ask you some questions. Let me go
See,
get that
I'm
question.
going to let her go so we'll have a break in my monotony. But I am not sorry that I took a long time.
No, I'm glad you did.
At least for 60 years and been scared to do it.
Well, I'm going to talk about this, how you are implementing some of the things that you've raised. We had a conversation last month when we were talking about this program, and you told me then, this is a quote from my notes, my special commitment is to go to every town in Mississippi that has more than 400 blacks and tell them we have to teach our children reading and writing, good and bad morality. The biggest thing teaches them, the biggest thing to teach them is moral character. How many towns have you visited? How's that going in your conversations?
You see, I first promised God 2 years ago that I was going to every county. I went to every county, most of the counties, more than once. But I never delivered God's message. I delivered James Meredith's message. So he said, okay, we're going to leave the counties alone. Because over 80% of all of the blacks in Mississippi live in towns under 3,000 people. So, as long as you live and have good health, I'm requiring you to go to every town with more than 600, 400 blacks and deliver my message. And don't think you can get away with delivering James Meredith's message no more. Be quite frank, I will say this. Many people accuse me of being courageous and brave. I've been scared to say what she just read that I said to her when we talked a month or so ago, and at least a few weeks ago. I've been scared to say that.
Why are you
Because look, I ain't heard nobody talk about it. Everybody dumbfounded and scared. What happened in Tennessee last month. I ain't heard nobody talking about it.
How does Tyree's,
I'm sorry.
how does the Tyree Nichols case relate to your, relate to
Okay,
your
number
mission?
one. Blacks, if they can help it, don't allow themselves to think about the white-black problem. It hurt them too bad. Whites don't talk about it to nobody, but even the brothers and sisters, because they don't even want them to know how they think about this issue. And I've been scared to mention it because everybody talk about black on black crime. And for the last many years, that's been growing and growing. And ain't nobody scared than blacks. Because 30 years ago, I'm going way back because I don't want nobody in here, man.
You can't make them.
But you understand, I just read in a book by an authority that I just used, he didn't say this, his thing was high. 90% of the black killed by blacks live within a few blocks of the killer. And 30 years ago, the biggest reason I heard on television, why did you shoot that man? He dissed me, meaning he disrespected me. What did he do? He stepped on my shoe and didn't say excuse. And I also read, and this book was written by a chief of police who happened to have been black in one of the major cities in the South. And he said that the blacks kill each other for any reason, or in most cases for no reason. He just killed them. I mean, now, you understand, I know that there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, but see, something has happened in the last few years that is really different. I mean, the crime, black on black crime used to mean something, but not much anymore. I mean, the carjacking, even in Mississippi, is no longer. They used to hijack the people closest to them. They used to rob the people closest to them. They done got shops like Al Capone now. They go where the money is.
So how do we as a society work one, to talk more about race relations, and two, work in a fashion that will encourage both white and black people from committing crimes?
This is, I'm going to answer that after I show. This is yesterday's Daily Mississippi. And if anybody can see it, it's more than Daily Mississippi on there. It's a Black Power piece on there. Now, when I saw this yesterday at 8 o'clock in the morning, I couldn't believe Mississippi had changed that much.
Changed that much?
Now, to answer your question,
Wait a minute, let's go back. But to change that much, that what, that they celebrate black history? Or that it's
well,
only 1 month?
I know a lot of people here familiar with Ole Miss. I've been reading Ole Miss, the Daily Mississippi, since Sidna Brower, the editor, when I stepped through the gate, was the editor. And of all the papers I got more copies over the years of the Mississippi than any other. This is 12 pages. All 12 pages. You got that one word.
Right. Yes. Yes.
And Mississippi, more than any other place, is ready to deal with this problem.
How do you start?
Number one, blacks have to start thinking about it. Most blacks are so hurt by the reality. And some reality you can't even talk about. I ain't had one black to volunteer a conversation about what happened in Memphis. Not one. No. Because it hurt them so bad. I am not sure no, I better leave that alone. The blacks, the two things that we have not dealt with, the legacy of slavery and the consequences of segregation. I ain't gonna deal with segregation. Let's just talk about the legacy of slavery and what happened in Memphis. Of course, I believe that the people that they're charging with crime, some of them got to be guilty, if not all of them. But that ain't the real problem. The real problem is the legacy of slavery that remains, that ain't never been talked about, more or less nobody did anything about. What is that legacy?
What is it? What do you call it?
Every slave owner, whether they had 10,000 slaves or one slave, had a legal duty to protect, to police his slave. If her slave hit my slave with a stick and he couldn't work, she had to pay me. America has always had a criminal justice system. But when the slavery existed, slavery was property, otherwise it couldn't be slave. And everybody was responsible for their property. I mean, but when they discontinued slavery in 1865, they just dropped it. Not Congress, not one person in Congress, not one legislator in Mississippi or any other state ever come up with the policy outlining what the new police of the former black slave, where his authority was. The owner had authority from the lowest misdemeanor to death, the highest crime. But nobody ever defined what the police could do.
So do you think the first thing that we need to do to improve race relations is to acknowledge that history of slavery in an affirmative action in some way. I mean, a pardon or something
No, all
more.
we need to do is think about it.
Okay.
And most people talk about what they keep, you know, you can't keep thinking about anything without doing something about it. Talking is the easiest thing human beings do.
Do you think people are taking their freedoms for granted?
No. Ooh, boy, I almost told what I really thought, but I'm scared to do that even
No.
here.
Yeah, this is a good piece.
Here. Okay, what is it? Self-interest. Don't you understand?
Yes.
Self-interest prevent everybody from doing what they think Jesus would do.
So you told me in our conversation, I have this quote here, if discrimination is bad for blacks, it is bad for all Americans. If discrimination is bad for blacks, it is bad for all Americans.
Because good and evil are the contesting forces in the world. If evil is not stopped, evil overtake everything.
And how do we prevent that?
In America, Jesus Christ, any religion really will handle it if it's practiced according to the beliefs of what's proclaimed. But I personally think, certainly with blacks, only Christianity will work. Because the best known two words in black world is Jesus Christ. Everybody know about Jesus Christ. And everybody know where to know what Jesus would say about the issue. But people usually select what fit what they decide to do. I mean, and it ain't one side. I have said quietly, first time I ever said it loudly, the absolute biggest supporters of the system of white supremacy are the black elite. That sounds like it don't make sense, but let me tell you something. The highest paid officials, not just in Mississippi, in any state, black, are government employees. And you understand, the highest paid person in Lafayette County was the principal of the black high school. That is true of every black high school in the state of Mississippi. And they were that only because of the system of segregation. And if you think they wanted that change, you got another thought coming.
You know, I've read books by different politicians who said that they were actually opposed to integration of the public schools because, for economic reasons, because that meant the black teachers would lose their jobs. And I think pretty much what you're saying is that self-interest took over.
But it is gone now. That is no longer the losing the job business. Right now, they can't get enough teachers for any school.
True. And why is that?
And they,
Why is that? And that's this as a daughter of a fifth grade
now,
teacher.
basically, that is the biggest part of my hope.
Okay.
In addition to building a James Meredith museum in Jackson, so we can document what happened at Ole Miss and what I think happened at Ole Miss is more important than anything that happened in this so-called movement before.
Why do you put Mississippi at the center of the movement?
Because Mississippi has made every major policy dealing with the white-black race issue since America been America. I mean, yes, sirree. Now, and the most important one is the 1890 Constitution that took the vote away from blacks for 80 years. And to be quite frank, there is still, and if anybody don't believe me, just evaluate the water thing in Jackson. Blacks don't have no more effective political power in Mississippi than they had in 1889. That was the year before 1890. I mean,
but they, is it because, well, it all comes down to voting and voting districts?
no.
No.
It's because of the people who understand politics. You understand, voting for people who benefit from voting, their vote is used to get what they need for themselves and their families. Blacks vote for the support the person they voted for.
Yeah.
They don't vote for their children and for their interests. Now, I've been scared to say that because I knew people wouldn't like it. But God said, you don't supposed to fear me. Why are you fearing these men and women? I said, because they can hang me for one of these trees that you allow anybody to use. I mean, but you see, the truth is the light. And don't anybody want to deal with the truth if they can get away with their life.
Do you think people have taken their freedoms for granted, and I mean both black and white?
No. They take their interest into account.
Okay? It's all personal interest. You say your last mission from God is to start talking about race relations and stop acting as it doesn't exist.
Most blacks try not to even think about it because it hurt them so bad. You know, the biggest thing you hear about driving while black, teach your children what to say when the police stop them. Do you know how humiliating, how uncitizen that make you? I mean, and everybody brag about, I teach my kids what to say when the police stop them. Why in the world should any law-abiding citizen have to go through that step?
That's a valid question.
But I've been scared to ask it because I know people, the biggest thing that people figure out is how to adjust to the system that they have to face. And nobody want to talk about it. I mean,
how do we do it? Does it start with the family or the church or society, which is much larger?
now, God knows, I didn't know whether I was going to ever come up with the courage to say it. The biggest problem is religion.
Really?
Absolutely.
That seems a contradiction to what you've been saying.
No. got a copy of this man on a mission that I handed out. And I want people to just read from the bottom, the last two sentence paragraphs. Meredith harken back. Everybody that's got a copy, just read that.
You want to read it out loud for those of us who don't have our reading glasses with us?
You want to?
Yeah, I don't have my reading glasses with me.
Oh, you want me to read?
Yes, please.
All right. Meredith harken, one of them big words I don't know what it means. Harken back to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Famous quote about Sunday morning being the most segregated time in America. Adding, saying that I added, that nobody has successfully done anything about that. Martin Luther King was my special hero. He said the best thing ever been written about James Meredith in a letter from the Birmingham jail. He said James Meredith, I don't know, he said nothing but good stuff.
Well, I wanted to give time for questions and answers from the audience. I have just one final question to ask you of my list. Last month you told me, I know how to solve these problems, but I don't know how to start. Ole Miss was the natural place. Ole Miss is the only place where change can initiate from. Why did you believe this in 1962, and why do you believe this today?
And I believe it more today than I did in 1960.
Because
I think most people in here, being as sophisticated as I know they are, have heard it said that just a few families in the Northeast control the money and the policy of America. No state in the Union has ever been controlled by fewer people than the state of Mississippi. And I guess I better stop because I answered your question.
Okay, let's give the chance to have the audience ask some questions. Would you like a sip of water before we go on to the next stop?
Thank you. Thank you.
Right? Because I know you get a sip of water. We have students in the audience, and we have guests from around the country, actually. I've talked to people from New York and Memphis, and
Georgia,
I think it was
Washington, D.C.
California.
California. I knew there was someone from California. So can we have, I see a hand out there. Go ahead. Speak very loudly so we can record your question.
Hey, my name is Fedora Sutton, and we met, and you know you're one of my great heroes. I must say, however, that I take umbrage would be too strong a word with your discussion about black on black crime. I think taking it just to black on black as if those crimes that you describe does not exist white on white does the whole black on black community a disservice.
Can't you have to interpret it from?
So, the other concern I had, it's not really a concern, I'd like you to go a little deeper into, you talked about, which is absolutely true, that of policing. But I had hoped that you would go to discuss the changing of the police system, the idea that right now the police system functions like that system you described that was in place during slavery.
What would be a more fairer police system than the one that we have today and have had historically?
Okay. It's so simple. The politician would pretty easily find a way around it. The policing problem. The real problem is that no policy or no authority has ever laid out what police can do legally. They just turned policing of the former black slaves, and that's what all people are now. They're not just black. All workers that are not well off are in the same category now. Even in Mississippi, it used to be that whites had a tremendous advantage in the system of justice. No longer. It's anybody that falls in a certain category. If I can, just hear me, every slave owner in Mississippi, most slaves own less than 100 slaves. So the person that owned 100 slaves had to police his slave. Policing means keeping people doing a stand within the law, not violating the law. That's what policing is for. Now, but authority is what counts. Because the owner of a slave was the owner, and it was his property, because you couldn't be a slave unless you were property in the United States. I mean, so automatically, if you had an axe, you were responsible for that axe. I mean, so if you owned a slave, you were responsible for that slave. When slavery ended, and the 13th Amendment say nobody can legally own another person, whether he's black or white. The legislature, the Congress, the legislatures of every state should have passed laws saying what the police could do. For a non-slave, you had police, but they knew that they couldn't arrest any citizen. They knew their authority. But the slave master had 100% authority. When the slave ended and they turned it over to the police immediately assumed policing, a jury, and whatever else.
Judge.
Okay, all right, let me try another question. Someone else, please? I see in the back. I can't see you because of the glare, but go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. My name is O.Z. Parker. My wife and I are here on the building. Dr. Meredith, you and I have been associated with each other for about 8 years. And during a casual conversation one night over the phone, we got into the discussion about your first day in class. Once you started class here at Ole Miss. And when you went to class, the professor and all the other white students in the class got up and left out. So I asked you, how did you feel when that happened? And your response to me was that I didn't feel anything because I was at war. So I want to ask you the question, what did you use, putting traditional warfare aside? What did you use, what was your weapon to fight that system?
Okay. He's referring to your first day of school at Ole Miss, when everyone left the classroom, and you previously, the gentleman asked you what you're thinking of, and you said you were at war, but, and you wanted to know what brought you, what was your inner strength, to, reach that decision?
Well, okay, maybe you can understand if I give a little more of the story. I spent 9 years in the military. I always wanted to change Mississippi since I can ever remember. And Kosciuszko was my measure. I didn't know what I wanted to do to Kosciuszko, but every time I went there, I didn't like what I experienced, and I wanted to change it. Now, that, according to Professor Eagles, who used to be, and I imagine still is, the highest paid professor at Ole Miss, did the longest 600 pages and best book ever written about me. And I learned more about my youth from reading his book than I ever knew. That's the truth. Now, the story that I know is true because I remember it. There was a white doctor that my father took me with him to his office. And up on his wall, he had been a football star at Ole Miss. He had a picture of him in his football stuff. And I asked him about that picture. And he told me about Ole Miss. And I said, that's where I need to be going. And I went in the military, spent 5 years. I got out, came back to Mississippi. That was in 1955, 2 months after the Brown decision. And white folks was mad as the devil, or madder than the devil. And my daddy said, the time ain't right. So I went back in the military, spent another 5 years, and came out. And my daddy thought the time was better. And my daddy called every shot. I didn't call one shot dealing with the Ole Miss thing. My daddy decided everything. He decided when we would try to push it, when we would try to get some more decisions in the court so the people would cool off, as Ross Barnett said, let them cool off, Mr. President. You understand? But my daddy was letting them cool off because he didn't want me to die. I mean, so I don't know. I lie so much I don't know when I finish.
Well, I remember one thing all the students left the classroom, what you said was, something to the effect, I'm here, they are not, so I am ahead of them.
Talking about the student.
Yeah, You were in class.
Look, I mean, they could cover all the classes they want.
Okay, how about one more question, because we want to leave time for the book
Yeah, I gotta read
signing.
my statement. I
And you
hope
gotta read your
still
statement.
got
Let me
it.
get one more question from the
Okay.
audience. Is there one other person? I've got some of my students out there. No one? All right, I guess, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Meredith, you talk a lot about your father. Can you say just a little bit about your mother? Or
Oh, boy. Look at here. Esquire magazine wrote 2 articles about me. One was the longest article any magazine ever wrote.
okay.
But the other article was written 20 years later, and they say they took the 17 best quotes from me. And the second quote was about my mother.
And her name?
Her name was Roxy Patterson Meredith. But what I said about my mother, that they wrote in this magazine, that my mother was slick and greased lightning. Only Mississippi know what that really means. Greased lightning. That means you so slick you can get people to do everything you want them to do.
Okay.
And I said that according to Esquire, my mother was slick and greased lightning, and I was slicking my mother. You running this show. The thing I'm gonna do is read that.
I think you already said the things in here. Why don't we just-
No,
You want to read it? Okay. You don't know? And then we'll leave. That'll be it, okay?
it took me
It's only one page.
a long time. I've been saying 40 years, but I decided to say a long time instead of 40 years to write this. A new policy on the white-black race problem by James Meredith. It is time to deal with the white-black reality in the world. Slavery is the lowest form of exploitation of man by man, but it is not the only kind of exploitation. After slavery, segregation was instituted. Segregation was many times worse than slavery ever was. The Constitution of the United States did a lot of good things for the world. One of the best things was to end slavery in 1865. Now we have to deal with the legacy of slavery and the consequences of segregation. Only the words of Jesus Christ and his teaching can provide the solution to the white-black race problem in the world. Jesus Christ is the first and the last. Jesus Christ is the beginning and the end. I promise to begin my last mission from God to develop a new workable policy on the white race issue problem in the world. My plan is to go to every city and town in Mississippi, starting today, February 17, 2023 in Oxford, Mississippi, and meet with elders, officials, and leaders of the people. Sincerely, James Meredith, Ole Miss,